The Alpha King pretended to be a crippled stranger. Only a rejected Omega gave him his last meal. Mist rolled in from the dark forest below, hiding the ruins of what once had been a bustling village. Broken walls jutted from the ground like the skeleton of a forgotten beast, and the stones were blackened with the smoke of battles long past. A heavy silence lay over the land, broken only by the mournful cry of a distant hawk. Through this gray landscape, a figure moved slowly. His steps were unsteady, and he leaned heavily on a wooden staff, the wood worn smooth from use. His dark cloak was torn and caked with dust, and the hood shadowed his face so no one could tell who he was. Even so, there was something in his posture, a subtle grace, a quiet command that made the air seem heavier around him. He paused near a collapsed archway, his eyes scanning the ruins as if searching for something or someone. The figure was careful to avoid the shattered streets and hidden pits. Every movement was measured, deliberate, and yet it betrayed a fatigue that ran deeper than mere travel. From a narrow alleyway, a soft sound came. A door creaked in protest as it opened, and a man stepped out, carrying a small bundle. He was thin, worn by poverty and hardship. His clothes were patched and frayed, and his hands bore the calluses of labor. This was Merk, an Omega rejected by his village for reasons he could never forget, left to wander the ruins alone most days. But he had a good heart, and even the smallest kindness he offered felt like a rebellion against the cruelty of the world. When Merk saw the stranger leaning against the arch, something in his chest tightened. The man was crippled, or so it seemed. One leg dragged slightly, and his hand trembled as he gripped the staff. Merk instinctively clutched the bundle of bread he carried, wondering if this stranger had eaten that day. "Are you hurt?" Merk asked cautiously, his voice soft against the howl of the wind. The stranger looked at him. His eyes, sharp and dark, held a flicker of something Merk could not name. It was not fear, nor was it anger, it was need, a raw, desperate need. "I am weary," the stranger said quietly, his voice deep and controlled, "and I am hungry." Merk's hand tightened around the bundle. He hesitated. This stranger was strange in more ways than one. Yet something in his tone, something humble yet faintly proud, made Merk's chest ache with pity. Slowly he stepped forward. "Then you will eat," Merk said, setting the bundle on the stone ground. "I have little, but it is enough for both of us." The stranger's eyes softened for a moment, and he nodded once. There was no arrogance here, no false claim of strength. Only survival and a quiet acknowledgement of the Omega's kindness. They sat together among the ruins. The bread was hard, and the water from a cracked jug was warm, but neither seemed to notice the poor quality. They shared it without words. A silence stretched over them like a fragile thread of trust. Merk studied the stranger's face more closely. Though gaunt and tired, it was strong and handsome in a way that was impossible to ignore. The lines on his face suggested authority, experience, and battles won or lost. Merk felt an odd pull in his chest, a mixture of awe and fear, as if the stranger had a story he could never guess. "Who are you?" Merk asked finally. His curiosity was stronger than caution now. The stranger shook his head slightly. "A wanderer, nothing more. Names are dangerous." Merk frowned. "Then why wander here? This land is cursed. No one lives here willingly." The stranger's eyes darkened, and he remained silent for a long moment. Finally he said, "Because sometimes even a king must leave his throne to survive." The words were strange, and Merk didn't understand. Yet they carried weight, an unspoken power that made him sit straighter. There was pain in those words, a memory too heavy to bear, and Merk felt an odd connection. He had lived with rejection his whole life, and here was someone whose suffering seemed to mirror his own. Night fell quickly over the ruins. Mist thickened, and the cold deepened. Merk motioned for the stranger to follow him toward a crumbling shelter he had found in the walls of the old village. It was not much, a roof barely held together, stones arranged to block the wind, but it was enough to escape the biting chill. As they entered, Merk lit a small fire, its light flickering against the broken walls. Shadows danced like phantoms, and the stranger's eyes reflected the flames with an intensity that made Merk's heart race. "You are too careful for a wanderer," Merk said, trying to fill the silence. "Most strangers who come here are desperate or dangerous. You feel neither." The stranger's lips curved into the faintest smile, almost imperceptible. "Perhaps I am learning," he said softly. "And perhaps I am in your debt." Merk blinked. "My debt? You don't even know me." "Yet," the stranger replied, "you have given me something no one else would. You have given me hope." Merk's hand trembled slightly as he poked at the fire. His life had been a series of rejections, betrayals, and lonely days. Hope was a stranger he rarely welcomed. Yet, sitting across from this man, so weary, so silent, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years: trust, perhaps even care. Suddenly, a distant shout broke the quiet. Both of them froze. From the direction of the cliffs came the sound of boots, heavy and purposeful, crunching over stone. The stranger's body stiffened, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the shelter. "They know I am here," he said, his voice tight. "They will not let me live long, not even as a crippled wanderer." Merk's heart pounded. Who are they?" The stranger did not answer immediately. Instead, he rose slowly, leaning on his staff. Even in his crippled guise, there was a fluidity in his movements, a grace that betrayed strength and training. He scanned the shadows, calculating, measuring, predicting. "They are men who once called me their king," he said finally, the words bitter on his tongue. "And now they would see me dead." Merk's eyes widened. "A king?" he whispered. The stranger only nodded, his jaw tight. He looked tired, broken in ways that no wounds could explain. Yet there was fire behind his eyes, a hunger for survival, and perhaps for something more. Merk felt a pull toward him, a strange mixture of fear, awe, and something gentler, something dangerous: desire. The wind howled again, stronger this time. Shadows lengthened as shapes moved in the mist. Merk's fingers tightened around a loose stone. He would not allow this stranger to face danger alone, not after the trust, the shared meal, the quiet moments of understanding. "Stay behind me," Merk said firmly. "I may be nothing to anyone else, but I will not let them harm you." The stranger's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through the mask. "Then you have courage," he said quietly, "and perhaps the heart of an Omega." Merk swallowed hard. The words felt heavy and strange, but somehow not untrue. He had been rejected all his life, scorned for being gentle, for being soft, for being himself. And yet here he was, standing for a man stronger than he could ever imagine, yet one who now depended on him. From the mist, figures emerged. They were shadowed, barely visible, but their intentions were clear. The stranger braced himself, and Merk stepped forward, heart hammering, ready to face what was coming. "Who are you?" one of the figures demanded as they approached, the shadows finally revealing armor and the glint of weapons. "Why hide him?" Merk looked at the stranger. The man's eyes met his, dark and piercing, and in that silent moment, Merk understood something important. This man, this fallen king, had survived wars and betrayal, and now he survived because of Merk. The stranger lifted his staff slightly, preparing not for attack but for survival. He did not strike first, he waited. Merk felt a pulse of fear but also a surge of determination. He would not falter, not now. Not for someone who had come to trust him, who had, in a strange and quiet way, given him hope that he had thought lost forever. As the shadows drew closer, Merk's heart raced. The fire flickered, casting long, twisting shapes across the ruined walls. And for the first time in years, Merk did not feel alone, because the stranger, crippled only in disguise, was now relying on him, and Merk, the rejected Omega, would not fail. The night stretched on, cold and unforgiving. The distant cries of the hunters grew louder. The ruins themselves seemed to hold their breath, and in that fragile, terrifying silence, two souls, one broken by power, the other by rejection, stood together, waiting for what the darkness would bring. And the stranger, with eyes as dark as the storm above, realized something he had never admitted to anyone. He could not survive alone. Not here. Not now. Merc had given him his last meal, and in doing so, he had unknowingly given him the first thread of salvation. The wind rose again, carrying with it the distant sound of steps, closer now, echoing against the ruins. The night had only just begun. Dawn rose slowly over the ruins, painting the sky with streaks of blood red and gold. Mist still clung to the stones, but the wind had softened. The night's danger had passed, for now, but both Merc and the stranger knew that their peace was fragile. The stranger moved carefully across the ruined village, testing his legs and muscles. Though he had appeared crippled, his body was far stronger than it seemed. Every movement carried the grace of a trained warrior, but he hid it well, careful not to reveal his true strength to Merc. At least, not yet. Merc watched him from the shadows of a collapsed wall. His chest still raced from the fear of the previous night. He had faced desperate villagers before, men who wanted to steal or harm him, but this was different. The stranger had a power that went beyond muscle or skill. It was in the way he measured the wind, the stones, the distance between them and the hunters. It was in the quiet fire in his eyes. "You move carefully," Merc said, breaking the silence. "You could have fought them yesterday and beaten them. Why not?" The stranger turned, his dark eyes holding a mixture of sadness and caution. "Because survival is not always about strength," he said softly. "Sometimes it is about patience and trust." Merc frowned. "Trust?" "Yes," the stranger replied. "You trusted me. You gave me food, shelter, even when you could have left me to die. That is a rare thing." Merc felt heat rise to his face. He had never thought of himself as brave or important. He had survived by being quiet, by keeping to the shadows, by accepting rejection. And yet, here was a man, broken in ways Merc could sense but not fully understand, who valued him. You are not what you seem," Merc said finally. "You are stronger than you let on." The stranger shook his head. "I am weaker than I seem, and perhaps stronger. It depends on the world and the people in it." Merc didn't understand entirely, but he nodded. There was a strange weight in the air between them, unspoken, growing heavier with every glance. The stranger settled beside the fire that Merc had rekindled in the small shelter. The flames reflected in his eyes, and for a moment Merc felt as if the fire itself had come alive inside the man. "I need to know, why did you come here?" Merc asked. "Why not stay where it is safe?" The stranger's gaze darkened. He looked toward the distant palace ruins on the horizon, barely visible through the mist. Because sometimes the safest place is no longer safe, and sometimes a man must disappear, even from the throne he was meant to rule. Merc swallowed. The words felt heavy, as if carrying the weight of an entire kingdom. "A throne?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Yes," the stranger said quietly. "I was a king, a ruler, and yet here I am, walking among ruins, relying on the kindness of someone I do not know." Merc's heart raced. A king? This man, so broken, so quiet, had been a ruler. He could barely imagine it, and yet there was no pride in his voice, no arrogance, only the faintest shadow of pain. "Why are you telling me this?" Merc asked, fear and curiosity mixing in his chest. "Because you need to know," the stranger replied. "Because if you are to help me, if you are to stay by my side, you must understand what you face. My enemies are not just men. They are shadows of the past, darkness that seeks to consume what little light remains." Merc nodded slowly, unsure if he fully understood, but he felt a surge of determination. He had lived all his life as a rejected Omega, alone and overlooked. Yet now he was here, standing with a man who needed him, someone whose life depended on him. And for the first time he felt purpose, and perhaps something deeper, a connection he had never dared to hope for. The day passed quietly, though uneasily. Merc gathered firewood and water, and the stranger watched him with careful eyes. Occasionally, he would test Merk with small questions, subtle challenges that revealed not just courage but wisdom. Merk rose to each challenge, sometimes surprised by his own cleverness, other times faltering but learning quickly. By the evening, the stranger had begun to reveal small glimpses of himself, not the king, not the warrior, but the man beneath. He spoke of battles won and lost, of alliances made and broken, of the heavy burden of ruling a kingdom filled with treachery and greed. He spoke of trust and betrayal, of power that had poisoned friendships, and of a loneliness that no throne could cure. Merk listened quietly, feeling the threads of the man's story wrap around him. It was not just a story of strength and defeat, but of something more human, more vulnerable. And in listening, Merk realized something startling. He had never felt seen, truly seen, until now. The night deepened, and the wind carried whispers from the ruined streets. Merk lit another small fire outside the shelter, preparing for whatever might come. The stranger leaned on his staff, scanning the shadows beyond, his body tense but patient. "You are careful," Merk said again. "Even now you do not trust me fully." The stranger shook his head slightly. "Trust is earned," he said simply, "and it is tested by fire." Merk's heart tightened. "Then I will not fail your test," he said, his voice quiet but steady. The stranger's eyes softened. "You may not know it, but you already hold power over me," he said. "Not power of strength, but of something far more dangerous, hope. You remind me that I can still survive, and perhaps even live." The words left Merk breathless. He had never thought of himself as a source of strength, never imagined that he could influence a man so powerful, so mysterious. And yet, here he was, part of the stranger's survival, part of the fragile thread that held him from destruction. Suddenly the wind shifted, colder now, carrying with it the sound of distant movement. The stranger tensed, his hand tightening on the staff. Shadows flickered across the ruins, shapes moving with a deliberate, careful pace. "They are here," he said quietly. "The men who seek my life, they have found me again." Merk's heart pounded. He had faced danger before, but this was different. The stranger's eyes were sharp, calculating, and Merk realized that he was not just protecting himself but preparing Merk for what might come. "Stay close," the stranger said, "and do not speak unless I tell you to. Trust me." Merk nodded, fear mixing with resolve. He had never imagined that his life would take such a turn, from hiding in shadows to standing beside a man whose presence demanded courage and loyalty. The figures drew closer, and the stranger's body moved with a grace that Merk could barely follow. He had thought the man crippled, but now he saw the truth. This was a warrior disguised as weak, a king hiding behind vulnerability, a force that could strike at any moment. Merk's breath caught as the first figure emerged from the mist. Armor clinked softly, weapons gleaming faintly in the firelight. The stranger did not flinch. He only studied them, assessing, predicting, waiting. "Who are you to hide him?" one of the figures demanded. His voice was harsh, accusing, carrying the weight of authority and command. Merk's fingers tightened around a loose stone. He did not know if it could help, but he was ready. Ready to stand, ready to protect, ready to face the consequences. The stranger's eyes met his. In that brief moment, Merk understood something profound. He had been chosen, not for strength, not for skill, but for heart. And the stranger, he needed him. The tension in the ruins was thick, almost visible. The mist swirled, the shadows moved, and the fire flickered as if aware of the danger. Merk's pulse raced. He had never felt so alive, so needed, so part of something greater than himself. The stranger lifted his staff, but not to strike. He did not attack. Instead, he stood tall, his eyes dark and fierce, and waited for the first move. Merk watched him, seeing not just a crippled wanderer, but a man of immense power, patience, and cunning. And then, as if sensing Merk's presence, the stranger's gaze softened just a fraction. "Prepare yourself," he said quietly. "This night is only the beginning." Merk's heart leapt. He did not fully understand what lay ahead, but he knew one thing: he would stand by this man no matter the danger, no matter the cost. For the first time in his life, he was not alone. The night deepened, the mist thickened, and the ruins themselves seemed to hold their breath. And in the center of it all, two souls, one hidden, one rejected, stood together, bound by trust, by courage, and by a fragile, growing connection that neither fully understood. The figures in the shadows moved closer, silent and patient. The fire flickered, casting long, twisting shapes across the ruins. Merk's hands shook, but he stood firm, beside the stranger who had become both his challenge and his hope. And in that silence, that fragile moment between fear and courage, the stranger realized something he had never admitted to anyone. He could not survive alone. Not here. Not now. Not without the Omega who had given him his last meal and, unknowingly, his first thread of salvation. The mist closed in, the shadows advanced, and the night held its breath. The battle for trust, survival, and perhaps something far deeper was only beginning. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the ruins in pale gold and soft pink. Mist still lingered, curling around the broken walls like a living thing, but the air had grown quieter. The shadows of last night's hunters had vanished, or perhaps retreated, but Merk knew the danger was far from gone. The stranger sat on a crumbling stone bench, his staff laid across his knees. He moved slowly, deliberately, testing each muscle and limb as if learning them anew. The air around him seemed charged, almost electric, though his expression remained calm, unreadable. Merk could sense it, the tension, the power beneath the surface, the careful restraint of a man who could strike with devastating force if he chose. "Why do you hide your strength?" Merk asked, finally breaking the silence. His voice was soft but firm. "You could have driven those men away last night." The stranger's eyes met his. For a moment, Merk saw a flicker of something he had not expected: vulnerability. "Because power can be dangerous," the stranger said quietly. "Not just to enemies, but to those we care for. If I reveal who I truly am, the world will treat you as I am treated, as a pawn, a target, a possession." Merk's heart tightened. The idea of being caught in the schemes of kings and hunters frightened him. Yet he also felt a strange pull toward this man, a growing connection that defied reason. "Then why trust me?" he asked. The stranger's lips curved slightly. "Because you have already shown me something no one else ever did. You showed me compassion, even when the world has taught you to expect cruelty." Merk looked away, embarrassed. "I don't feel special," he admitted. "I've lived all my life as nothing." "You are far from nothing," the stranger said, his voice firm yet gentle. "You are strength in its quietest form. You have courage that others lack, and perhaps a heart that can change the fate of a king." Merk's breath caught. He had never imagined that anyone could see him like that, not truly, not anyone of importance. And yet here was a man, weary and broken, whose life now intertwined with his own, acknowledging him as more than just an outcast. The day stretched on. Merk moved among the ruins, gathering water and small provisions, while the stranger remained watchful, silent, and precise. Occasionally, he would test Merk's courage, sending him to climb crumbling walls or retrieve items from the edge of cliffs, not to endanger him, but to see if he could handle the weight of fear and decision. Each time Merk returned, a little stronger, a little braver, a little more aware of the bond forming between them. And each time the stranger's gaze softened, though his mask of caution never fully dropped. By evening, the tension in the ruins had grown thick, like the mist that clung to the stones. Merk had noticed it. The air seemed heavier, the shadows longer, and the sense that unseen eyes watched their every move. "Someone is coming," the stranger said suddenly, his voice low. "Closer than last night, not hunters, someone with intent." Merk's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" The stranger rose, leaning on his staff but standing taller than before. "It is time you know who I am and what I truly face. You need to choose, Merk." Trust me fully or step back and let the world decide your fate. Merrick felt a strange heat in his chest, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and something else, something stronger, something that made his breath catch. I choose to stay, he said finally, his voice trembling but steady. I will not leave you. The stranger studied him, the corners of his eyes softening. Then you must understand I am not just a wanderer. I am the Alpha King of Ashara. My enemies believe me dead, but I live hidden, because betrayal runs too deep even within my palace. Merrick staggered back slightly, the weight of the revelation crashing over him. The man he had fed, sheltered, and begun to trust was not just a stranger. He was a king, a ruler feared and revered, a man whose life was wrapped in blood, politics, and power. You are the Alpha King, Merrick whispered, disbelief in his voice. Yes, the stranger said, his dark eyes unwavering. And now your choices matter more than ever. For if you stand with me, you will face not just hunters or assassins, but the full weight of a kingdom that would rather see me dead than free. And yet, I believe you have the courage to stand by my side. Merrick's mind raced. The Omega had lived a life of fear, rejection, and loneliness. To stand beside a king was unimaginable, yet here he was, feeling an unexpected surge of determination. I will stand, he said, voice firmer now. I will face it all. The stranger's lips curved into a faint smile, the first Merrick had ever seen. Then we begin. They moved toward the remains of an old palace on the cliffs. The walls were scarred from ancient battles, the gates twisted and broken, but the space held an undeniable sense of authority. It was a place of power, and yet empty. Ghosts of the past lingered in the air, whispering secrets of betrayal and lost glory. Inside they found traces of recent movement, footprints in the dust, faint scuff marks on the walls. The stranger's eyes narrowed. They know I am here, he said quietly. The traitor within my court, he has sent men to hunt me, to kill anyone who helps me survive. And now, you. Merrick's heart tightened. The danger was no longer distant. It was here, close and relentless. He had feared danger all his life, yet now he felt something unexpected, a willingness to face it. For the stranger, for the bond they had begun to form, for a chance at something greater than himself. The choice is yours, Merrick, the stranger said. You can run and survive alone, or you can stand with me and face what comes. There will be no turning back. Merrick's gaze hardened. He had been rejected, scorned, and ignored all his life. But he would not flee from this moment. Not now, when he had seen the fire beneath the stranger's calm exterior, when he had felt the weight of trust and need. I stand, he said. I will not leave you. The stranger studied him, then nodded. Good, then you must learn. There is much to teach, much to prepare for, and there is danger still ahead. The hours passed in tense preparation. Merrick learned to move quietly, to observe shadows, to anticipate threats. The stranger taught him how to read the air, how to sense danger before it appeared. Each lesson drew them closer, their bond growing through shared fear, shared effort, and a quiet understanding that neither had expected. As night fell, the ruins around them seemed to hold their breath once more. A chill wind swept through the broken halls, carrying the faint scent of approaching danger. Merrick's heart raced as he realized the hunt was not yet over, and that his decision to stand by the Alpha King had changed everything. From the shadows emerged figures moving deliberately, silently. They were not ordinary men. They were trained, precise, and their intent was clear, to kill. The stranger did not flinch. He rose fully, staff in hand, his body tense but controlled. Merrick moved beside him, heart pounding, hands clenched. He was no longer the boy who hid in shadows. He was a participant in something larger, something dangerous, something that demanded courage he had never known he possessed. The first figure stepped forward, breaking the silence. Step aside, Omega, the man said, his voice sharp and cold. This does not concern you. Merrick stood taller than he had ever imagined he could. It concerns me, he said, voice steady. He is under my protection. The stranger's eyes met his, dark and fierce, but there was something else there, pride, perhaps even relief. Merc had made his choice and he had not wavered. The shadows moved closer, tension thick in the air, but the stranger did not attack. Instead, he waited, watching, calculating, ready for the moment when movement and power would be needed most. Merc felt a strange calm amidst the fear. He was not alone, not anymore. And in that quiet, tense moment, Merc realized something profound. His life had changed forever. He had chosen to stand with a man of power, a man of secrets, a man who had been everything he had once feared. And yet, standing there beside him, he felt alive in a way he never had before. The night stretched on, shadows closing in, danger approaching from every corner. Merc's heart raced, but he did not falter. He had made his choice. He had chosen to stand. And now he would face whatever came next, together with the Alpha King, together with the man who had unknowingly awakened courage and hope in his heart. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it whispers of betrayal and the promise of battle. The first strike would come soon, and neither Merc nor the stranger could predict the outcome. But in that moment, as they stood side by side, two souls bound by trust and growing connection, they knew one thing: neither would face the darkness alone. The mist thickened. The ruins seemed alive, waiting. And in the quiet before the storm, the Alpha King and the rejected Omega prepared for the trials that would test not only their survival, but the fragile, powerful bond forming between them. The night was heavy over the ruins of Ashara's old palace. Mist rolled through broken corridors and shattered halls, curling around the shadows like fingers. Every stone seemed to hum with the memory of betrayal and battles fought long ago. Yet amid the darkness, a single fire burned, small and flickering, illuminating two figures standing side by side. The Alpha King, no longer hidden, and Merc, the rejected Omega who had chosen to stay. The figures that had come to hunt the king moved closer, silent and deadly. Their armor glinted faintly in the firelight, weapons ready, intent clear. But the king no longer relied on disguise. He was strong, poised, and deliberate, every movement calculated to protect himself and Merc. "You stand with me?" the king asked, his voice low but firm. Merc's eyes met his. "Always," he said. There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt. He had chosen this path. He had chosen to stand with a man whose life was dangerous, whose enemies were countless. And yet, in doing so, he had discovered courage he never knew he possessed. The king nodded once approvingly. "Then watch carefully," he said. The battle began without warning. Shadows surged from the mist, moving fast and precise. The king's staff became an extension of his body, striking with speed and strength that belied his disguise from earlier days. Merc watched, heart pounding, as he realized that the man before him was not merely a king or a warrior. He was a force of nature. Yet even in his strength he moved with care, ensuring Merc was safe. Merc took a deep breath. He had learned from the king small lessons in observation, anticipation, and bravery. Now they were put to the test. As one of the attackers lunged toward the king, Merc moved instinctively, using a fallen beam to block the strike, giving the king an opening to disarm the man. "Good," the king said, his eyes flashing briefly with pride. "You have courage, Omega, and it serves you well." Merc felt warmth rise in his chest. The king had acknowledged him, not as weak, not as rejected, but as someone capable. And that acknowledgement, simple as it was, filled him with strength. The fight continued, swift and brutal. Shadows moved like waves, striking from every corner. But the king and Merc fought together, instinct and trust guiding them. Each time Merc acted, the king adjusted, and each time the king moved, Merc followed. It was a dance of survival, of bond, of emerging trust. Finally, the last shadow fell back, retreating into the mist. Silence settled over the ruins once more, heavy and tense. The king's breathing was steady but deep. Merc's chest heaved with adrenaline. They had survived, but only barely. The king turned to Merk, his dark eyes searching. "You chose this path," he said quietly. "You could have left. You could have survived alone, but you stayed." Merk looked down for a moment, then back at him. "I stayed because you needed me," he admitted. "And because I wanted to. I have never had a reason to care for someone before, not really, but I care for you." The king's expression softened. "Care is dangerous," he said, voice low and almost a whisper, "for both of us. And yet I feel it too, more than I expected." For the first time, the king allowed himself to drop his mask completely. His shoulders relaxed, and the tension in his eyes eased slightly. Merk saw not just a ruler or a warrior, but a man who had been betrayed, hunted, and left alone. Yet now, through the courage and compassion of one Omega, he could feel hope. Merk stepped closer, the firelight casting long shadows around them. "You do not have to bear it alone," he said softly. "Not anymore." The king's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Perhaps it is time I learned that strength does not always mean facing the world alone." They moved together through the ruined palace, checking for signs of remaining enemies. Every step was careful, measured, but there was a quiet rhythm now, an unspoken understanding. Merk no longer feared the dangers. They were real, yes, but he had found courage and he had found trust. And in that trust, he felt a connection with the king that went beyond survival. Hours passed, and finally, the ruins settled into an uneasy calm. The mist thinned slightly, revealing glimpses of the shattered beauty of Ashara's old halls. Broken statues stood like silent witnesses. The walls bore the marks of ancient wars, and yet the air felt lighter. The darkness had been confronted, and they had survived it together. The king turned to Merk once more. "You have changed me," he said quietly. "Not just for tonight, not just for survival, but in ways I did not believe possible. You have reminded me of compassion, of hope, of trust." Merk felt a lump in his throat. "And you have reminded me that I am capable, that I can stand, that I can make choices that matter, that I am not nothing." The king nodded, stepping closer. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the lines of pain, strength, and endurance. "We are bound," he said softly, "not by rank, not by power, but by choice, and that is stronger than any throne or army." Merk's chest tightened. He had never felt so seen, so valued, so powerful in his own quiet way. And here, in the ruins of a kingdom filled with betrayal and darkness, he realized something he had never dared to hope. He belonged. They sat together by the fire, watching the shadows retreat. Silence stretched comfortably between them. Merk finally let himself breathe fully, the tension of weeks dissolving into the warmth of connection. The king watched him, eyes soft, and for the first time Merk did not feel the weight of fear pressing down. You could reclaim your throne," Merk said eventually. "Your people need you." The king's expression darkened slightly. "Yes, but first there must be healing, trust must be restored, betrayal must be rooted out, and I must learn to rule not just with strength but with wisdom and care." Merk nodded. "Then I will stand with you. Not as a servant, not as someone beneath you, but as someone who believes in you and in what you can become." The king's eyes glimmered in the firelight, deep and dark. "And I will learn from you, Omega. You have shown me courage, loyalty, and a strength I did not know I needed." The wind rose, carrying whispers from the ruins, but they no longer carried fear. The danger had not vanished completely, but it was no longer overwhelming. They had faced it together and in doing so, forged a bond stronger than any threat outside these walls. The king reached out, a rare, deliberate gesture, and Merk took his hand. It was not a gesture of domination or power, but of equality and trust. They stood together in the ruins, hands clasped, watching the first rays of dawn illuminate the kingdom. For the first time in years, the king felt alive, not as a ruler burdened by power, not as a warrior hunted and betrayed, but as a man capable of trust, of hope, of connection. Merk felt alive too, not as the rejected Omega, the overlooked, the unseen, but as someone who mattered, someone who had changed the course of a man's life, and perhaps a kingdom. And as the sun rose fully over the ruins, golden light spilling across broken stones and shattered halls, they knew something profound. They had survived the night, the shadows, the betrayal, and in doing so had discovered something stronger than fear, stronger than power, stronger than the darkness itself. They had discovered each other. The wind carried a faint whisper through the ruins, a promise of challenges yet to come. But for now, in this quiet moment, side by side, the Alpha King and the Omega had found redemption, trust, and a bond that neither distance nor danger could break. And for the first time in their lives, both of them understood a simple truth, that the heart, when guided by courage and compassion, could be more powerful than any throne, more enduring than any kingdom, and stronger than the darkest shadows. The ruins were still and silent, the mist receding, and the fire burned low. But the bond between them blazed brighter than any flame. They had faced the night, and together they would face the future, whatever it might bring.